Hello everyone. Have a nice evening. Enjoy a good ghost story with the gentle sound of rain from Blackridge Stories, and sleep well. If you find these stories interesting, please subscribe and comment for me. Thank you very much everyone, and now, without keeping you waiting any longer, let's go to part one of the story. The ghosts of sailors at the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. The wind howled over Puget Sound as if mourning something lost long ago. Standing at the edge of the water, I could see the modern suspension of the new Tacoma Narrows Bridge stretching across the bay, gleaming and steadfast, a proud descendant of a tragic legacy. They say the original bridge, Galloping Gertie, collapsed in 1940 in a violent display of nature's wrath, but few speak of what lingers there now, especially on fog-drenched nights when the tide is high and the past seems unwilling to rest. It began with a storm. Not a normal Pacific Northwest drizzle, but something deeper, almost sentient. Locals had warned me. As a traveling documentarian, I'd heard my fair share of urban legends, but something about this one, it crawled under my skin. Fishermen in the area whispered about seeing figures along the bridge's edge. Men in weathered navy coats, staring out into the sea, unmoving. One man told me they were sailors who had died not in the collapse itself, but during the bridge's construction. Silent sacrifices buried beneath cement and water. That night, I set up camp near the old pilings, just far enough away to avoid the traffic of the new bridge. The air grew thick, and the clouds sank lower. I turned on my camera and began recording commentary, but a high-pitched whistle, like a ship's call or a scream, cut through the air, making my breath catch. I wasn't alone. My flashlight flickered as I panned it over the shoreline. For a brief second, it landed on a figure, tall, clad in dark blue with brass buttons that glinted in the light. But as I moved forward, he was gone. My camera, still rolling, caught nothing but fog and static. At 2:17 a.m., the bridge began to moan. Not the metal. This wasn't wind against steel, but a deep, aching sound. A lament. I ran toward the noise, my feet splashing in the wet gravel. The closer I got, the colder it became. The water, calm only minutes earlier, churned beneath the bridge in unnatural circles. That's when I saw them, a row of men, 10 or more, standing in the fog on the remains of the original bridge's support. Their postures were stiff, faces pale and blurred as if memory struggled to reconstruct them. They didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt them watching. One stepped forward. He raised a hand, slowly, almost pleadingly. I should have run, but my body stayed frozen. His mouth opened, though no words came. Only a distant echo like a ship's horn, followed by the creaking of rope and wood. Then the scream. It didn't come from them, but from somewhere deep beneath the waves, like something ancient had awoken. The water burst upward near the pilings, forming a whirlpool of mist and glowing debris. Shapes moved in it, timbers, chains, and faces. Dozens of them, maybe more. The sailor raised his other hand and pointed toward the water. A single word materialized in my head. Listen. I stepped closer, against all logic. The fog thickened. My skin turned icy. In the depths below, I heard voices. Not clear words, but fragments, overlapping. A choir of grief. We were forgotten, buried in stone. Tell them. Suddenly, a blast of cold air shoved me back, knocking the wind from my lungs. The figures vanished. The fog lifted, just enough to reveal the shoreline again. The tide had receded unnaturally far, revealing twisted remnants of the original bridge's foundation, rusted bolts, torn beams, and something else. A boot. Old leather, torn at the heel, stuck between rocks. I pried it loose and inside, found a weathered dog tag. The name was nearly worn away, but the letters M. Hartwell were still visible. Back in town, I showed the tag to the Historical Society. One woman paled and whispered that Marvin Hartwell had been listed among the construction crew, presumed drowned after scaffolding collapse during early reinforcement work. His body never recovered. But there had been rumors even back then that multiple workers had vanished during night shifts. The records were vague, censored even. Wartime discretion, they said. I returned to the bridge a week later with offerings. Old Navy coins, a compass, and a note scribbled with the names of the missing I'd found in archived documents. As I placed them at the base of the old piling, the wind stopped. For a few moments, it was perfectly still. Then came the echo of boots on metal, a low whisper, and the sense of something passing by. I never saw the sailors again, but every year on November 7th, the night of the collapse, the wind around the Tacoma Narrows picks up in odd, rhythmic gusts, like marching. Some say it's just coincidence. Others swear they hear voices beneath the water. And a few, like me, know better. We remember the ones left behind. And sometimes, the bridge remembers too. Let's get to part 2 of the story. Embers that whisper. The haunted house of Queen and Hill. Perched high on Queen and Hill in Seattle, behind twisted ivy and a rusted iron gate, stands a Victorian-era house whose beauty has long faded into decay. Once the pride of its neighborhood in the late 1800s, the home is now a dark relic of the past, windows boarded, roof sagging, and the front porch weathered by over a century of rain and whispers. Locals pass it quickly. Some cross the street. Children are told not to play near it. The legend goes that in 1893, the Whitmore family, a young couple and their 2 daughters, perished in a fire that engulfed the house. Though the official report blamed faulty gas lighting, rumors speak of something else, of a seance gone wrong, of voices from the walls, of smoke that came not from fire, but from within the mirrors. The house was rebuilt, partially, but no one stayed for long. Tenants came and left, driven out by unexplainable sounds, freezing drafts in summer, and, worst of all, the footsteps. Always the footsteps. In recent years, the house had remained unoccupied, owned by the city, but left untouched. That was until Marissa Devlin, a historian and restoration enthusiast, moved in. She had always been fascinated by haunted sites, brushing aside ghost stories as folklore. Her goal was to restore the Whitmore house and open it as a museum. The first day she entered, she noticed a scent. Not mold, not dust, but ash, faint and acrid. As she walked through the darkened hallways, floorboards groaned beneath her boots. But something else echoed too, the distinct patter of light footsteps, as if a child was following close behind. She stopped. Silence. At night, Marissa set up her makeshift workspace in the parlor. The fire and the hearth wouldn't stay lit. Her tools would go missing, only to reappear stacked neatly beside the kitchen sink. The upstairs bedroom door, always shut, creaked open around 2 a.m. every morning. By the 3rd week, she began recording the sounds. What she caught chilled her. Soft giggling, a woman's voice humming an old lullaby, and faintly, the crackle of flames. One night, as rain lashed against the window panes, Marissa was awakened by a loud bang. She ran downstairs. The front door was wide open, despite being locked. In the foyer stood a soaking wet child, barefoot, wearing a charred nightgown. Her hair was blackened at the ends, her eyes wide with sorrow. Marissa gasped. The girl raised her hand and pointed upstairs, then vanished, as if pulled backward into darkness. Determined to uncover the truth, Marissa dug into city archives. She found sketches of the original house layout, and something curious. There had been a hidden room behind the fireplace. The original builders had walled it off, for reasons unknown. Her heart pounded. She returned to the house and removed the rotting wooden panels behind the fireplace. There, concealed behind soot and brick, was a door. Inside was a room no bigger than a closet. On the wall, charred drawings of stick figures, a family of 4. In the center, an old porcelain doll sat untouched by time, and on the wall, written in soot, "We never left." That night, Marissa was not alone. The house came alive. She awoke to the sound of a music box playing, one she didn't own. Her reflection in the mirror lingered even after she stepped away. Whispers filled the hallway, whispering her name. She tried to leave, but the front door wouldn't budge. Windows refused to open. Her phone had no signal. Trapped, she sat in the parlor as the temperature dropped. Frost crept along the wallpaper, and a voice, clear and full of despair, called from the hidden room. It wasn't the fire that killed us, it was the voice. Then the floor trembled. The scent of smoke filled her nostrils. From the fireplace, blackened hands reached out, clawing at the air. Shadows danced violently across the ceiling, and the walls began to bleed with scorch marks. Marissa ran upstairs, heart pounding. In the bedroom, she found the source of the music, a scorched music box, still ticking. As she touched it, a vision overtook her. The Whitmore family sitting in a circle, eyes wide in terror, a dark presence hovering behind them. The flames erupted not from the walls, but from the mirror. They had summoned something that never left. Marissa screamed, and just like that, the vision ended. Silence returned. She woke up on the front lawn the next morning, clothes covered in soot. The house quiet once more. The front door was locked. Her phone now worked, but she knew something had changed. The house had shown her the truth. She never returned. The city deemed the property unsafe and boarded it permanently, but neighbors still report strange occurrences. Shadows seen through upstairs windows, the sound of a piano playing after midnight, and the distinct scent of burning wood on windless, dry evenings. Some say the Whitmore family is still there, bound to the house by tragedy and forgotten rituals. Others believe something far older has taken root in its walls, something that feeds on sorrow, on fire, on fear. One thing is certain, the house remembers, and it waits. Let's get to part 3 of the story, Whispers in the Walls, the Everett house tragedy. Everett, Washington, a quiet town shrouded in coastal mist and evergreen trees. On a sleepy side street, hidden behind overgrown hedges and a rusted mailbox, stands a weathered 2-story house with pale green siding, its windows clouded like blind eyes. Locals call it the Crying House, though no one lives there. No one has for years. The story begins in the winter of 1978. Her name was Eleanor Mayfield, a quiet, solitary woman in her 30s. Eleanor lived alone in the house after inheriting it from an aunt. She was a librarian by trade, fond of classical music and collecting porcelain figurines. Neighbors said she was kind, if a little distant, always polite, always alone. Then, one cold January evening, she vanished. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, no goodbye notes, only the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air, and a teacup, still warm, sitting on a reading table. 3 days later, her body was found in the attic, or rather, what was left of it. Authorities claimed she had hanged herself, but something about the scene didn't add up. There were bruises on her wrists, scratch marks on the attic floor, and worst of all, her eyes were open, wide in terror, her face frozen mid-scream. The coroner's report was inconclusive, noting signs of both struggle and something else, something they couldn't explain. The house was sealed, but strange reports began almost immediately. New owners didn't last more than a few months. The woman's cries, soft at first, then rising to shrieking sobs, would echo through the house at night. Lights flickered. Cold spots moved like invisible figures. Doors opened on their own. One family claimed to see a pale woman in a long nightgown standing at the top of the stairs, her hair wet and matted, her mouth whispering words they couldn't understand. Over the years, the house became a local legend. Teens dared each other to spend the night, but none made it past midnight. Paranormal investigators visited, capturing EVP recordings filled with static, and once, a faint voice saying, "Don't leave me here." Then came Amy Collins, a documentary filmmaker drawn by tales of haunted houses. She moved in under the pretense of researching local legends, setting up motion-activated cameras and recorders in every room. For the first week, nothing happened. Then, one night around 2:17 a.m., a motion sensor triggered in the hallway. The footage showed nothing at first, just shadows. But as the seconds passed, a dim light appeared at the end of the corridor, like the reflection of candlelight. Then a figure stepped into frame, a woman in a pale dress, her head tilted unnaturally, her arms hanging limp at her sides. She stood there, unmoving, until the footage cut out. Amy, shaken but determined, continued her investigation. She discovered something odd. Eleanor had written letters, dozens of them, unsent, tucked away in a box beneath the floorboards. Most were ramblings, but one, dated just days before her death, stood out. There's something in the walls. I hear it at night. It calls to me in her voice, but it isn't her. I think it wants to wear me. I'm so tired. That night, Amy heard it for herself. A voice, soft and trembling, crying in the next room. She followed the sound, but found nothing. Just Eleanor's bedroom, door slowly swinging open. Inside, the temperature dropped instantly. Her breath turned to mist. On the mirror above the dresser, a message appeared slowly, as if written by an invisible hand. Look up. Amy did, and saw the attic hatch was wide open. Compelled by a mix of dread and determination, she climbed the creaking ladder. The attic was empty save for a single rocking chair, and on it, a porcelain doll, one Amy hadn't seen before. Then, footsteps behind her. She turned. No one, but when she looked back, the doll's head had tilted. Its eyes, wide and unblinking, were now staring directly at her. Something brushed her neck. A whisper. Help me. Amy fled the house that night. Her footage was never publicly released, but some clips were leaked online. Blurry images of a pale woman walking upside down along the ceiling, shadows dancing around an empty chair, and static-laced audio of a woman sobbing, begging. He still lives in the walls. No one knows who he was. Some believe Eleanor was haunted by a previous occupant, a man rumored to have disappeared decades earlier, possibly the aunt's secret lover. Others think the house itself is cursed, that something ancient and malevolent has claimed it as its own, feeding on grief and isolation. Whatever the truth, the house remains empty. The city has posted warning signs, but on quiet nights, those who walk past claim they still hear her, the woman who died alone, crying for someone to notice. Windows, long boarded up, sometimes show fingerprints from inside, and if you listen closely, just after midnight, you might hear her voice too, a breath behind your ear. I don't want to die alone again. Let's get to part 4 of the story, Whispers Among the Pines, the haunted depths of Olympic Forest, nestled in the northwest corner of Washington state. The Olympic National Forest stretches for miles with towering evergreens, moss-covered paths, and a silence so profound it presses against your chest. But beneath its natural beauty lies a darker truth, one that whispers through the trees and lingers like breath on your neck. Long before the land was a national park, it was home to generations of native tribes, including the Quinault, Ho, and Makah peoples. These lands witnessed battles, sacred rituals, and brutal colonization. Some say the forest still remembers, and not all who enter leave unchanged. It began with a hike. In the fall of 2012, a couple from Portland, Marissa and James, set off on a weekend backpacking trip through the Olympic National Forest. Both experienced hikers, they planned a 3-day trek along the less-traveled trails near Lake Quinault. They were looking for peace, fresh air, and time away from the noise of modern life. What they found was something else entirely. On the first day, as the sun filtered through the canopy and the scent of cedar filled the air, everything seemed perfect. But just before dusk, Marissa began to feel watched. The sensation was subtle at first, a prickling along her spine, as if something unseen had turned its gaze upon her. That night, as they set up camp beneath a thick grove of Sitka spruce, James heard what he thought was an owl, a low, rhythmic call echoing through the trees. But it wasn't quite right. Too deep, too human, almost like chanting. At 3:12 a.m., Marissa woke with a start. Someone, or something, was walking around their tent. Slow, deliberate steps that crunched the pine needles. She held her breath, convinced it was a bear. But then came a whisper, low and guttural, in a language she didn't understand. She woke James, who unzipped the tent and flashed his light. There was nothing, only trees and shadows. But just beyond the reach of the flashlight, he swore he saw a figure, tall, cloaked in darkness, unmoving. The next morning, they debated turning back, but stubbornness won. They pressed deeper into the forest. The further they hiked, the more the forest changed. The air felt heavier. Birdsong faded. Even the wind grew still. James, normally grounded and logical, admitted he felt off, like he was walking through a place he didn't belong. That evening, they stumbled upon something odd. A small clearing marked with wooden totems, long decayed. Carvings of wolves, eagles, and human faces stared silently from the edges. In the center, half buried beneath moss, was a circle of stones, a fire pit, perhaps, or something ceremonial. Marissa knelt to examine it. That's when she heard it again, a whisper, this time closer. She turned. No one, but James was standing still, eyes locked on something behind the trees. "Did you see that?" he asked. A shadow had passed, fast, silent, and distinctly human-shaped. It moved not through the forest, but with it, as if part of it. That night, they didn't sleep. Every time they closed their eyes, they heard footsteps, always circling, never approaching. Sticks breaking, breathing that didn't belong to either of them. At one point, the temperature dropped so quickly that the tent frosted over. At dawn, they broke camp and began hiking back, but the trail had changed. The markings they had made on trees were gone. Landmarks they'd passed before seemed twisted wrong. Paths looped back onto themselves. Time felt elastic. Hours passed like minutes, or minutes like hours. Marissa began to cry, convinced they were being led in circles. James, trying to keep calm, realized his compass spun erratically, first pointing north, then east, then back. Then came the drums, soft, distant at first, a slow beat that reverberated through the trees. Neither of them said a word. They just ran blindly, stumbling, tearing through brambles. Eventually, they reached a service road. A park ranger found them hours later, scratched, shaken, dehydrated, back in civilization. They tried to explain what happened. The ranger simply nodded and said, "You're not the first." Local tribes have long told stories of spirits guarding the land. Warrior spirits, protectors of sacred ground, still watching over it long after death. Some believe they appear to those who disrespect the forest. Others say they seek to warn travelers of dangers not yet understood. A Quinault elder, when told of Marissa and James's experience, only said they were lucky. The forest let them go. Others haven't been so fortunate. A solo hiker in 1998 was found weeks later, barefoot, muttering in a lost dialect. He never spoke again, eyes always darting to the tree-line. Campers have recorded audio of chanting, footsteps, and voices that mimic their own. Trail cameras have caught fleeting glimpses of figures, tall, feathered, their faces obscured by shadow, standing perfectly still in impossible places. One clip shows a figure watching from the high branches of a tree, 20 feet up, unmoving despite strong wind. Today, warnings remain. Rangers advise hikers to stay on marked paths, avoid venturing too deep without a guide, and never disturb natural formations, especially stone circles or old carvings. But curiosity always wins, and if you find yourself in the Olympic forest, deep enough that the trees block the sky and silence reigns, listen closely. You may hear the footsteps first, soft, steady, circling you. Then the whisper, ancient, mournful, perhaps a warning, or a call. You shouldn't be here. But by then, it might be too late. Let's get to part 5 of the story. Phantom of Vashon Island, shadows beneath the pines. Just across the waters from Seattle lies a quiet, unassuming stretch of land known as Vashon Island, accessible only by ferry and shrouded in a gentle Pacific mist for much of the year. Vashon seems like the perfect retreat, charming, isolated, and steeped in the beauty of the Pacific Northwest. But not all of its charm is comforting. On the island's northwestern edge stands a crumbling Victorian home, its windows boarded and garden overtaken by brambles. Locals refer to it simply as the old Whitmore house, though few dare to approach it, especially after sundown. To some, it's just an old relic from another era. To others, it's something far more chilling, a gateway to something unnatural. The house has stood since 1896, originally built by the Whitmore family, wealthy landowners from the East Coast who moved west seeking opportunity and isolation. For years, they lived quietly, tending to their orchards and hosting elaborate summer gatherings. But something changed in the winter of 1912. That year, the family, Charles and Eleanor Whitmore, and their 2 young sons vanished. No signs of struggle. No note. The fireplace was still warm. A teapot left to boil dry on the stove. Their coats hung neatly by the door. They were simply gone. When neighbors finally broke in days later, all they found was silence and a house that felt unnaturally cold, even with fires burning. The island's sheriff at the time declared it a case of disappearance under unknown circumstances. It was never solved. Over the decades, the house passed through various hands. Most didn't stay long. Some barely lasted a week. Strange occurrences drove them out. Doors that opened on their own, icy drafts that moved against the wind, and shadows that drifted across the walls, though no one stood near them. But it wasn't until 1978 that the legend of the Whitmore Phantom truly took hold. That fall, a college student named Daniel Monroe rented the property while working on a photography project. He'd heard the stories, but dismissed them as island gossip. A skeptic at heart, Daniel wanted solitude. The house, with its creaking floors and ivy-choked windows, offered the perfect kind. His journal, found years later, tells a very different story. In his first entry, Daniel wrote about hearing footsteps above him the first night, even though he was alone. He explored the second floor, flashlight in hand, but found nothing by the third night. He wrote of lights flickering even though the power had been cut for years. The hallway light turns on at exactly 2:17 a.m. every night, he noted. Always the same time, always flickers. I watched it for 20 minutes. Then came the cold. Daniel described an unnatural chill that would flood specific rooms, especially the children's bedroom, where the temperature would drop low enough to see his breath, even in September. It's like the house exhales, he wrote. I can feel it. But the most terrifying entry came on his sixth night. Woke up at 3:11 a.m. to the sound of humming. A lullaby, female voice, coming from the parlor downstairs. I stayed in bed. I couldn't move. It sang for 6 minutes. Then silence. Daniel left the house 2 days later. He never spoke publicly about what happened, but his photos from the week, most of them blurred or overexposed, include a chilling image of the second-floor landing. In the corner of the frame stands a faint silhouette of a woman in period dress. Her face is obscured, her hands outstretched. Since then, the Whitmore house has remained largely abandoned. Locals, especially older islanders, warn against visiting after dark. Some claim to have seen pale figures moving past the upstairs windows. Others speak of a pressure that builds in the chest the closer you get to the property. In 1995, a group of amateur paranormal investigators camped on the grounds overnight. 3 of them fled before sunrise. One of them, a woman named Lisa Drexler, was later found on the beach, barefoot and repeating a phrase over and over. She's still waiting at the window. When pressed about what she saw, she simply cried. Recordings from that night captured strange noises, clicking, whispers in reverse, and a loud bang at exactly 2:17 a.m. But the most disturbing was a soft voice on tape that seemed to say, "Please don't leave me again." Who or what is the Whitmore Phantom? Some believe it's Eleanor, the mother, still searching for her missing sons. Others think it's something darker, a malevolent spirit feeding off sorrow and isolation. A few conspiracy theorists even claim the family vanished due to a ritual gone wrong, pointing to arcane symbols scratched beneath the floorboards, found in a 1984 renovation attempt that was quickly abandoned. What is certain is that no one has ever been able to live there long, and those who try are never quite the same. Even now, the Whitmore house looms over Vashon's northern coast, a decaying monument to grief and mystery. The trees around it seem to lean away. Birds avoid it. In winter, fog gathers there first and lingers longest. Tourists sometimes venture close, usually on dares. Some laugh, take photos, and leave. Others report headaches, nausea, or the odd sensation that someone is following them back to the ferry. One man, a mail carrier, claims to have seen a candle flickering in the attic window, though no one has been inside for years. Another swears he heard a child crying from the garden. So if you ever find yourself on Vashon Island and someone offers to show you the old Whitmore place, think twice before accepting. And if you do go, bring someone with you. Don't go alone, because the house is still there, and something inside it is still waiting. Let's move on to part 6 of the story. The spirits of the sailors at the Seattle docks. whispers beneath the waves. Seattle's harbor glistens under city lights, its calm waters reflecting the skyline like a polished mirror. Ferries glide in and out, container ships rest at port, and the buzz of industry masks a history far older and darker than most realize. Long before the tech giants and bustling markets, these docks witnessed desperation, bloodshed, and death. Seattle's maritime past is a tale of conquest, war, and tragedy. And some say, not all of it has been laid to rest. Even now, in the deepest hours of the night, strange things stir at the edges of Pier 91 and the old Alaskan Way. Locals speak of the harbor's morning hour, just after midnight, when the wind shifts strangely and the cries of the past can be heard echoing through the fog. It began during the 1850s, when Seattle was just a remote port struggling to survive. Back then, whaling ships for traders and even smugglers would come through the harbor. Fights broke out frequently between sailors and local militias, and the waters ran red more than once. One of the bloodiest episodes was the Battle of Elliott Bay, an undocumented naval skirmish during which an entire vessel, the Calliope, sank under mysterious circumstances. Witnesses claim to have seen it torn apart by cannon fire, yet no records show a single official engagement. All hands aboard, more than 40 sailors, were lost to the depths. The strange part, divers who later searched the wreck found no battle damage, no cannonballs, no evidence of fire. It was as if the ship had simply imploded. From that moment on, the docks gained a reputation. One of the first recorded hauntings came in 1892. A night watchman named Harold Green was patrolling Pier 57 when he heard what he thought was the splash of a man falling overboard. He rushed to the edge but saw nothing in the black water. Moments later, he claimed to hear gasping, then a chorus of voices murmuring just beneath the surface. He leaned over, peering into the murk, and saw dozens of pale faces staring back up at him, motionless, eyes wide with terror. Harold quit the next day. His written report was dismissed as stress-induced hallucination. But he wasn't the last. In 1910, a longshoreman named Patrick Doyle went missing during a graveyard shift. His body was never found. Days later, other workers began reporting an unsettling phenomenon. Whenever someone walked alone between piers, they would hear footsteps behind them. Heavy boots, wet boots. When they turned, no one was there. Some even claimed to hear whispers in languages they didn't understand. Portuguese, Spanish, Russian. Voices that came in on the salt wind and vanished as quickly as they arrived. The most chilling account came from a tugboat captain, Elliott Manners, in 1947. He was navigating through thick fog near Harbor Island when he saw a wooden ship drifting silently across his path. No lights, no sound, no engine. As he radioed to report it, the vessel passed near enough for him to see the figures aboard, gaunt, soaking wet men standing still on the deck, staring forward with hollow eyes. Their skin was gray, their uniforms dated, their mouths moved, but no sound came out. When he blinked, the ship was gone. He later told investigators, "It was like looking at ghosts, except they saw me too." Today, the docks are busier than ever, but the ghosts haven't left. Security cameras often capture shadowy figures drifting between containers. Night guards report cold spots, abrupt drops in temperature so intense their breath becomes visible, even in summer. Some hear knocks from inside sealed shipping containers. Others report hearing their name whispered from just behind them, only to turn and find no one there. A chilling case occurred in 2011 when a crew member of a cruise ship docked in Seattle heard scratching from outside his cabin one night. When he opened the door, the hallway was empty, but when he returned to bed, he found a damp sailor's cap resting on his pillow. Security footage showed no one entering or leaving the cabin. Even more unsettling, when the item was tested, it was found to contain seawater tainted with sediment from 19th century shipwrecks. One legend persists among the harbor workers, that of the sighing sailor. He's said to appear at the far end of the pier, always just out of reach, dressed in a tattered naval coat, dripping wet. He never speaks, but lets out long, mournful sighs that echo like a warning. One dock worker, Gina Telford, encountered him on a foggy night in 2018. She described hearing him long before she saw him, a sound like someone grieving beneath their breath. When she spotted him standing by a mooring post, she approached, thinking he was hurt, but the moment she called out, he turned and vanished into the fog. She left her post that night and never returned. Historians believe that Seattle's harbor may rest atop dozens of forgotten graves, sailors buried at sea or washed ashore and never claimed. Some believe the very waters hold onto their souls, unwilling to release them. Others suggest something even more sinister. The harbor is cursed, a kind of liminal space where the dead and living coexist. A gateway, a thin place. If you ever walk the Seattle waterfront late at night, especially near the old piers, listen carefully. You might hear the creak of an invisible hull, or the thump of boots soaked in brine, or a single, broken voice whispering through the fog. We never made it home. Whether it's the tragedy of the Calliope, the forgotten sailors of war, or something older and deeper than history can record, one thing is certain. Seattle's harbor doesn't sleep, and neither do its ghosts. Let's get to part 7 of the story, the lost souls of Washington's ghost towns. Shadows that never left, nestled deep in the forests and hills of Washington state, lie remnants of forgotten places, abandoned mining settlements, collapsed cabins, and rusted-out relics of lives once lived. They are ghost towns in every sense of the word, crumbling reminders of ambition and survival. But for those who have dared to visit, they're more than just old wood and stone. They're haunted. One such place is Monte Cristo, once a booming silver mining town founded in the 1890s, now accessible only by foot or ATV. Its decaying buildings sit silent beneath the looming peaks of the Cascades, but hikers who make the journey often report hearing whispers between the trees, soft voices that seem to speak in fragments of the past. Local lore tells of a group of miners trapped in a sudden cave-in during the winter of 1895. Snowfall had blocked all access, and with no way to dig them out, they perished slowly underground. Rescue came too late, and when the cave was opened, nothing remained but shredded tools and scratch marks along the rock walls. Since then, strange things have occurred near the old mine. Campers have seen flickering lantern lights drifting through the trees, too far, too deep in the forest to belong to any hiker. Some have followed the lights, only to become hopelessly lost. A few never returned. Just south of Monte Cristo lies the ruins of Melmont, a small coal mining village abandoned in the 1920s. Nature has reclaimed much of it, but the shell of the old schoolhouse still stands, a crooked structure of rotting timbers and moss-covered stone. According to urban legend, a teacher once perished there in a fire. Her body never recovered. Visitors say that when they step inside the schoolhouse ruins, they feel watched. Some hear chalk scraping against unseen blackboards. Others swear they hear faint laughter, children's voices, followed by sudden silence, as if the entire building is holding its breath. One photographer reported that every photo he took within the schoolhouse turned out blank, except for one. In it, behind the collapsed desk, a pale woman in an old-fashioned dress was staring back at him, her hands charred black. He never returned to Melmont. Another chilling sight is Govan, located in eastern Washington, once a thriving farming town. It's now little more than a few skeletal buildings and a collapsed schoolhouse. In 1902, the town was rocked by a brutal axe murder. Judge J. Lewis and his wife were slain in their home, their bodies discovered by neighbors the following morning. To this day, the crime remains unsolved. Locals say the judge still walks the roads at night, searching for justice. A group of ghost hunters who visited Govan in 2016 captured an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, that simply repeated over and over, "I saw him. I saw him." They later claimed their equipment shut down for no reason. Their car wouldn't start until morning. But it's not just these individual towns, it's a pattern. Across the state, ghost towns from the gold rush, the timber boom, and the early railroads all seem to share something in common. A sense that someone was left behind. Travelers report a recurring figure, a man in miner's clothing, face obscured by shadow, standing motionless beside abandoned wells or at the edge of collapsing bridges. No matter where the town is, north, south, mountains, or forest, the description is always the same, even more unsettling. His presence is almost always followed by a disturbing sound, the steady clink of metal on stone, like someone endlessly hammering with a pickaxe. But when people follow the sound, they find no one, just broken ground, and a sudden, inexplicable chill. In 2021, a small documentary crew spent the night in Bodie, a ghost town in Okanagan County. They were there to film a short series about forgotten places in the American Northwest. At 3:07 a.m., their infrared cameras captured what appears to be a woman walking slowly down the main street, her figure slightly transparent. She stops near the old mercantile and turns, facing directly into the camera. Her face is hollow, her eyes empty. The next morning, the team awoke to find all of their gear moved, their batteries drained, and a child's drawing, done in red chalk, left beside their tent. The drawing depicted 3 stick figures standing beneath a burning sun. One had no head. They left Bodie without completing the film. Even modern visitors to these towns, urban explorers, drone videographers, or amateur ghost hunters, report sudden equipment failures, dead zones where GPS fails, and a strange, low hum that seems to vibrate through the air. Some believe the energy comes from the land itself, ancient and unquiet. Others insist it's the restless dead, the souls of miners who died trapped underground, pioneers who succumbed to disease or cold, or the spirits of those murdered far from justice. They were people forgotten by time, and time, in return, has forgotten to let them go. There's one tale that stands above the rest. Near the town of Liberty, a prospector once claimed to have found a gold nugget the size of a man's fist. He vanished 2 days later. To this day, people still wander those hills hoping to find his lost mine. But the deeper they go, the more strange things seem to happen. Disorientation, time loss, missing persons. The Tacoma Nation has long warned against venturing too deep into these lands. They speak of ancient spirits, woken by greed and blood, now watching from the hills. If you decide to visit any of Washington's ghost towns, remember, they are not abandoned. They are occupied by memory, by history, and by something that lingers. Don't wander off alone. Don't chase voices. And if you hear the sound of a pickaxe striking stone, turn around. Go back. Because not every ghost wants to be forgotten. Let's move on to part 8 of the story. The weeping shores of the Columbia. Spirits of the lost migrants. The Columbia River is one of the most iconic waterways in the Pacific Northwest. Wide, powerful, and winding. It once served as a critical route for explorers, settlers, and migrants seeking a new life in the West. But for every family that reached their destination, there were many who didn't. The river, for all its beauty, claimed lives. And according to the stories whispered by locals, it never gave them back. During the mid-1800s, thousands of settlers traveling the Oregon Trail reached the Columbia River on their final leg westward. From there, they built rafts or loaded their wagons onto ferries and floated downstream. The current was often treacherous, the rocks hidden, the weather unpredictable. Boats capsized. Families were separated. Children swept away in seconds. It is said that the cries of those children still echo across the water on foggy nights. One of the most enduring legends comes from a stretch of riverbank near what is now Beacon Rock. It was there, in 1853, that a migrant family, the Harrows, attempted to cross the river with their livestock. Their raft broke apart in the swift current, and only the father, Elijah Harrow, made it to shore. His wife and 2 daughters were never seen again. Elijah built a small cabin overlooking the river, where he remained until his death decades later. Locals claim he never spoke a word after the accident, not even to the traders who brought him supplies. Years after his death, hikers reported seeing a man in ragged clothes sitting on a rock near the river's edge. He would stand slowly, point across the water, and vanish. No footsteps, no sound, just sorrow. Further down the river, near Celilo Falls, the land bears a different kind of grief. Once a thriving fishing site for indigenous tribes, The falls were drowned in the 1950s by the construction of the Dallas Dam. Along with them, thousands of years of history and hundreds of burial sites were submerged. Some elders from nearby reservations believe that the spirits disturbed by the flooding were never at peace. Fishermen along this stretch of river often tell stories of hearing drumming beneath the water, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat in the deep. Others say they've seen canoes drifting silently upstream against the current with no one inside. One fisherman, who'd spent decades on the river, claimed to have pulled in his net one evening to find it full of stones, arranged in the shape of a spiral. That night, he woke to the sound of footsteps circling his house. There were no prints in the morning, just water on his porch. Even modern-day boaters feel the weight of the river's past. In 2003, a young couple kayaking near Rooster Rock reported a strange fog rolling in from nowhere. Within minutes, they lost all sense of direction. GPS failed. Compass spun. Then they heard it, a woman sobbing. At first, they thought someone had fallen into the river. They called out. No answer. Then the fog parted briefly. What they saw was a woman standing waist-deep in the water, her long hair hanging down, her face turned away. She was wearing a dress that looked like it belonged to another century. They called to her again. She turned. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale and stretched, her mouth opened, but no sound came out, just the sound of rushing water, louder and louder. Then she was gone. The couple paddled back as fast as they could. When they reached shore, they realized something chilling. The woman's footprints were already there, leading out of the water, and ending right behind where they had stood. Stories like these are common all along the Columbia. A trucker who pulled over near the river's edge to rest in 1987 claimed he awoke to see people walking across the surface of the water. Dozens of them, some carrying packs, others holding the hands of children. He tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come. The moment he blinked, they vanished. One hiker near the Dallas encountered an old man standing by a twisted cedar tree. The man said, "They follow the river. Always have. Still trying to get home." When the hiker looked away for just a moment, the man was gone. There were no footprints in the mud. Locals believe the Columbia has memory, that it holds the pain of those who died along its shores and refuses to forget them. Campers who pitch tents too close to the water sometimes wake to the sound of crying, or worse, the feeling of hands pulling at the corners of their tent from the outside. In 2019, a group of college students camping near the Rowena Crest claimed to hear a child calling out in the night. They searched with flashlights, thinking it was a prank, but the voice always stayed just ahead, always just out of reach. Eventually, they returned to their tent. In the morning, one of them found a handprint on his car windshield, small, like that of a child, pressed into the dew. The problem? There had been no children in the group. Some say these spirits are not angry, just lost, wandering the banks of a river they never meant to die beside, searching for loved ones, for homes, for a way across. Others aren't so sure. They point to the increased reports of disappearances near remote stretches of the river, of fishermen who vanish without a trace, of hikers who are later found miles from where they began, barefoot, muttering about a woman in white, or a raft that never reaches the other side. If you ever walk the Columbia's banks at night, be careful. Don't answer the voices, no matter how familiar they sound. Don't follow the footprints. And if you see a lantern glowing across the water, drifting slowly toward you, turn around, because not every soul that walks beside the river belongs to the living. Let's get to part 9 of the story. Whispers from Greenwood Cemetery, the restless spirit of Spokane. Tucked behind towering pines and veiled in early morning mist lies Greenwood Cemetery, one of the oldest burial grounds in Spokane, Washington. Established in the late 1800s, the cemetery holds generations of pioneers, war veterans, and forgotten souls. Though its marble headstones and wrought iron gates speak of peace, those who visit after dusk often tell a different story, of unseen footsteps, fleeting shadows, and voices that speak in whispers. According to local lore, one grave in particular refuses to remain silent. It began with the caretaker. Harold Briggs had tended to Greenwood for over 2 decades. He pruned the trees, repaired old plots, and knew every corner of the grounds. But in 2006, Harold started avoiding a specific area near the eastern edge, row 17, plot 42. The grave belonged to a woman named Annabelle Wright, buried in 1893. No family ever visited. The stone had chipped and faded with time. Harold said it wasn't the grave itself that frightened him. It was the cold, even in the heat of summer. He claimed that patch of earth felt like winter. His tools would frost over. His breath became visible. Once he heard humming, a woman's voice, low, mournful, and impossibly close. He quit 2 weeks later. Visitors to Greenwood often report a strange feeling of being watched, especially near Annabelle's grave. A retired schoolteacher, Ms. Loretta Jameson, said she saw a figure in black standing near the plot during her morning walk. Thinking it was a mourner, she approached to offer a greeting, but as she neared, the figure turned and vanished, leaving only a faint scent of lavender in the air. Security footage installed after a series of vandalism incidents captured something even more unsettling. At 3:12 a.m. on a foggy October night, a shadowy figure appeared to drift between the rows of tombstones. The camera glitched, froze, and when it resumed, the figure stood inches from a lens, though no eyes could be seen beneath the veil covering its face. Local ghost hunters from the Spokane Paranormal Society conducted a midnight investigation in 2014. Armed with EMF detectors, spirit boxes, and thermal cameras, they focused their attention on Annabelle's plot. At first, nothing unusual happened, but around 1:45 a.m., the spirit box emitted a single word: return. Then the temperature plummeted. One of the investigators felt her coat being tugged, though no one stood nearby. Another captured an image of the grave glowing faintly blue, too dim to be seen with the naked eye, but clear through the thermal lens. As they packed up to leave, one of them, Jake Mallory, turned to take one last photo of the headstone. When he reviewed the picture later, there was a pale face behind the stone, eyes closed, mouth open in a silent scream. Who was Annabelle Wright? Historical records suggest she was the daughter of a local physician. She died suddenly at age 26 under mysterious circumstances. No cause listed on the death certificate. Some whispered she drowned in the Spokane River. Others claimed she was pregnant out of wedlock and sent to an asylum, where she perished. But one story, told only in hushed tones by older residents, suggests something darker. They say Annabelle was accused of witchcraft. According to a journal found in the attic of an old church on the outskirts of Spokane, a preacher in 1892 described a young woman of unnatural power who could speak in tongues and cause storms with her cries. After the sudden deaths of 2 townspeople, she was blamed. Within days, she disappeared. Her body was later found near the cemetery, throat bruised, eyes wide. They buried her in secret. No funeral, no family, just a stone, etched with her name and nothing else. Since then, people have claimed to hear chanting in the graveyard during thunderstorms. Dogs refuse to enter. Birds fall silent. One teenager, dared by friends to spend the night beside her grave, awoke screaming. His hair turned stark white around his temples. He said he dreamed of a woman buried alive, of clawed hands scratching the lid of a coffin, of being dragged into the earth. Some say Annabelle's spirit doesn't want revenge. She wants her story told, her truth unearthed. Others argue she guards something buried beneath her, a secret, or perhaps a curse. In 2021, a city crew repairing a nearby fence accidentally unearthed old bones, small ones. A child's. There was no record of a child's grave in that area. The bones were reinterred, but since then, the sightings around Annabelle's plot have increased. One woman claimed she saw Annabelle standing beside the child's grave, weeping. When she blinked, both were gone. If you visit Greenwood Cemetery today, you might feel nothing at all. Just quiet, trees swaying, wind across the grass. But stay past twilight, and you may hear the crunch of footsteps behind you, though no one is there. You may smell lavender. You may feel something cold settle over your shoulders. And if you stand beside Annabelle's grave and listen carefully, you might hear the faint sound of humming. Let's get to part 10 of the story. The Haunting of Port Townsend. The ghost of a murdered woman. Port Townsend, a charming coastal town nestled on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington, is known for its Victorian architecture, scenic views, and quiet streets. But behind its picturesque facades lies a dark secret, one that has lingered for over a century. At the heart of the town stands an old, withered house that many locals believe to be haunted. The house, known to some as the Gray House, has long been the subject of eerie tales and unsettling encounters. It is said that the ghost of a woman who was tragically murdered there haunts its halls, forever tied to the tragic events that transpired on a stormy night in the late 19th century. The story of the Gray House begins in the winter of 1889, a time when Port Townsend was growing rapidly as a bustling port town. A wealthy widower, Charles Whitmore, moved into the grand house with his young wife, Eleanor, who was known for her beauty and grace. The couple lived a life of luxury, but beneath the surface, their marriage was far from perfect. Charles was a controlling, jealous man, while Eleanor often felt isolated and alone, a feeling that grew stronger with time. The couple's marriage eventually took a tragic turn when Eleanor was found dead one cold, misty night. Her body was discovered in the parlor of the house. A single bullet wound to her chest. Charles claimed that she had shot herself in a fit of depression, but the evidence didn't add up. Neighbors spoke of heated arguments between the couple, and some even claimed to have seen Charles leave the house just hours before Eleanor's body was found. Despite the suspicions, no charges were filed against Charles. The tragedy seemed to fade into the past, but the house and its dark history remained. People who visited the home after Eleanor's death often reported a sense of unease. The house, once filled with laughter and light, had become a place of sorrow and fear. In the years that followed, the Gray House changed hands several times. Each new owner quickly grew uncomfortable and moved out after only a short period. Some claimed to hear strange noises in the dead of night, faint whispers, and the sound of soft footsteps echoing through the hallways. Others spoke of cold spots, where the temperature would drop dramatically without explanation, no matter the weather outside. However, it wasn't until the 1930s that the house gained its notorious reputation as one of Port Townsend's most haunted locations. A young couple, the Stewarts, moved into the house and reported seeing a woman in a Victorian dress standing at the front window late at night. The woman's face was always obscured by the thick curtains, but the couple claimed they could see her figure clearly, a tall, slender form with long flowing hair. At first, the Stewarts assumed it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a neighbor playing a prank, but the sightings continued, night after night. Eventually, they began to feel the presence of the woman in the house itself, an oppressive, cold sensation that seemed to follow them from room to room. The sense of being watched grew so intense that they were forced to leave. The house was abandoned once again, and over the years, the eerie tales only grew more intense. Local legends said that Eleanor's restless spirit had never left. The house had become a site of intrigue for ghost hunters and thrill seekers, but it was also a place of fear for the people of Port Townsend. Those who had ventured into the house late at night reported strange occurrences, doors slamming shut on their own, items shifting positions as if moved by invisible hands, and a persistent sense of dread in the air. As the years passed, the Gray House fell into disrepair, and it seemed as though time itself had abandoned it. The house's exterior, once grand and well kept, began to show signs of age. The paint peeled, the roof sagged, and the windows grew cloudy. But even in its state of neglect, there was an undeniable pull that seemed to draw people toward it. In the early 2000s, a couple of curious tourists from out of town visited Port Townsend and, hearing the tales of the haunted house, decided to check it out. They were surprised to find the door to the Gray House unlocked, as if inviting them in. As they entered, they immediately felt an oppressive presence, as though the house itself was alive and watching them. They made their way through the dusty rooms, taking photos and exploring. But as they walked past the staircase, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind them. Turning quickly, they saw nothing, but the air grew cold. One of the tourists, a woman named Emily, took a step forward, only to feel a cold hand brush her shoulder. She turned again, but there was no one there. Terrified, the couple quickly left the house and went straight to the local inn to tell their story. The innkeeper, an elderly woman who had lived in Port Townsend her entire life, listened intently and then told them something they would never forget. "The woman you saw," she said softly, "was Eleanor Whitmore. She still haunts the house, waiting for justice, waiting for someone to tell her story. Her soul is trapped here, and she can't rest." Today, the Gray House stands as one of Port Townsend's most infamous haunted locations. Despite being boarded up and abandoned, it remains a place of intrigue and fear. People still report seeing a woman in the window, her face forever hidden, her figure lost in the shadows of the past. Some claim that the woman's ghost is not merely a spirit, but a warning, a symbol of a tragic, unresolved story that echoes through the ages. Others believe that Eleanor's soul will never find peace until the truth of her death is finally uncovered. The haunting of the Gray House is not just about the flickering lights or the shadowy figure in the window. It's about the unresolved history, the pain, and the sorrow that still lingers in the walls. And as long as the house stands, Eleanor's restless spirit will continue to roam, waiting for the justice she never received.